Okay, this is just going to be a brief rant on a religious subject. Many years ago, I took a class on the history of Christianity, and that's when I first came across the term apologetics and apologist. And at that time, I didn't really like the word. And when people asked me why I didn't like it, I just told them that I didn't like apologizing for my faith. And for those who are unfamiliar with these terms, an apologist and apologetics, this is the reasoned defense of a set of beliefs or ideas. It's got the same origin as the word apology, which originally meant to give a reasoned defense of one's actions. But in the modern day, an apology is to express remorse for something. Because in the modern day the term apology refers to expressing sorrow or remorse for something, I don't like using the term of being an apologist or apologetics when I'm speaking of my own faith. But in recent days, I have been considering the term a little bit more, and I've come to realize that it's not just this association with sorrow that bothers me about the term. And well, to give a little bit more, the term is most commonly used to reference those who speak of religious beliefs primarily. And in the past, there were many historical Christian apologists, and now in the modern day, we get a lot of what are called LDS apologists. And the Christian apologists would write a reasoned defense of Christian doctrine, while the LDS apologists, being Christian also, but they write a reasoned defense of LDS doctrine, generally addressing other Christians' questions and criticisms. But this is my issue with apologists in general, and what I have come to realize in studying a lot of what they have said, both historically and in the modern day. And I'll start with the modern day because that's what I'm most familiar with. But apologists seem to, they don't just defend, they don't explain the doctrine and just leave it, this is our doctrine, this is what we believe, this is why we believe it. Rather, they try to explain it according to popular science and popular culture. So an apologist isn't somebody who is just giving a reasoned defense of the doctrine anymore. It is somebody who is literally apologizing for their faith being at odds with popular science and popular culture. And so they will try to explain away doctrine so that it will conform with what is popular at the time. And to give you an example of this, I personally, well, pause that a moment. Let's not say that. And to give an example of this, when speaking of the flood, the great flood and Noah's Ark, it has been long believed in the Christian world and in the LDS Church, which is part of the Christian world, that the flood was global, that the entire earth was covered in water, and that only Noah and the people and animals he took with him on his ark survived that catastrophe. But modern apologists will try to find ways to say that that didn't happen because science, or modern scientists, say it didn't happen. Now, I say modern scientists because it is true, they do quote frequently, especially in the LDS Church, that true religion and true science are never contradictory. They always agree with each other. And I agree with this. But it has to be true science and not just the theories of men. And true science requires direct observation or the testimony of one who has directly observed. People who talk about the past without knowing the past, without having seen the past, especially going back thousands or millions of years, that's not real science because it's not observation. It is only speculation and theory, and that is why I call it modern science and not just science. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to explain Noah's Ark and the flood according to these theories of men that are popular in the modern scientific community. And so they look at it and say, well, scientists say that there wasn't a global flood, that the land was divided, or the continent split and drifted apart over millions of years. And so they try to look at the Bible and they try to look at doctrines of the church and explain it according to these scientists. And so they'll talk about, well, maybe it was just a local flood in the Middle East. There's the theory of, the Black Sea used to be a lot smaller and used to be kind of an inland lake with a lot of people around it, and then there was this big flood where the strait there broke open and all the water came pouring in, and that's what Noah was talking about, but it's just in the Black Sea area. Or some people say it was a series of floods. But they all try to dismiss what the Bible and what our church leaders have stated concerning the flood, that it was a global flood, that it covered the earth, and that only those on the ark survived. They try to reason it away and explain it away so that they can agree with the modern popular scientific community. And they do this again with, as I mentioned, the dividing of the continents. It says in the Bible that in the days of Peleg the land was divided. And they will say, oh, no serious student of the Bible believes this. But that's what the doctrine states, that's what the scriptures state. And so that, oh no, it wasn't that the land was divided, it was that the people were divided by tribes on the land. And so we can agree with popular science and yet still claim to believe the doctrine of the church. And I don't like this. I stick with doctrine. What the church teaches, what the leaders teach, what the scriptures teach, I accept it. I believe it. I believe in a literal flood. I believe that in the days of Peleg, the continents were ripped apart rapidly. It was an event of splitting the continents. The land was divided. I believe these to be literal historical facts because the scriptures and the prophets tell us that they are literal historical facts. And I don't really care to be popular among the scientific community. And because of this, I do not consider myself an apologist, because I am not trying to make the doctrine fit with popular theory and popular culture. I am not apologizing for being at odds with what the rest of the world says. I am simply stating what I know to be true, what I believe, and what I accept as doctrine and from the leadership and from the scriptures. That is why I am not an apologist, and I will never call myself an apologist, and I will correct anybody who does call me an apologist. Now, on a related note, I want to mention, I mentioned the ancient apologists of the Christian world, and in our church, we teach the historical context of a great apostasy, where after the apostles of Christ died, the gospel was lost. The priesthood authority they held was not passed on to a new generation, and the doctrine became corrupted through its mingling with the philosophies of men, particularly Greek philosophy. And as I'm looking at modern apologists who are constantly trying to blend popular science and culture into church doctrine and trying to make them mesh together as one, which can't be done without destroying the true doctrine, I look back at all these apologists in the ancient world, and I see just how that process of apostasy went, how it started and how it ended in its ultimate conclusion of a complete loss of the gospel. Because the apostles, when we read the New Testament, the apostles who wrote those books, wrote those letters, none of them are trying to explain the gospel truth according to popular theory and philosophy. Matter of fact, Paul actually condemns philosophers. He doesn't like philosophers. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. Their whole process of thinking is in error to Paul. The closest thing we have to a comparison with popular philosophy is on when Paul comes on Mars Hill and he gives his sermon. He starts by saying, I realize you guys are all superstitious because I was walking past all your altars to all your gods, and I came to this one altar that said to the unknown God. So you guys are so scared that you're going to miss a god that you're just going to set up an altar saying, well, just in case we missed a god, we'll sacrifice here for all those gods we might have missed. Well, let me tell you about the God you don't know. And that's how he opens his sermon. He's not comparing. He's not saying they're right about all their other gods. He doesn't try to make their philosophies match with the truth of the gospel. He just uses that as an opening to kind of catch their attention and give them something to build off of. But from there, he just teaches them the gospel. He gives them the doctrine. He gives them the truth of the gospel without any need to make it conform to popular theory, popular philosophy, popular science. And we see this all through the New Testament. And we also see this in the stories and sermons that are presented in the Book of Mormon, where we actually have a great scene with the sons of Mosiah. Ammon, it's a famous story in the church, Ammon teaching King Lamoni, and he asks him, do you believe in God? And the king says, I don't know what that means. He says, okay, do you believe in the Great Spirit? And he says, yes, I believe in the Great Spirit. So, okay, this is God. Now that we have a common ground, we can start to give you the rest of the truth. But we needed a starting place. And we see that this kind of teaching is done very well, but it is never in the context of, well, the science says one thing and we have to agree with this, so we're going to alter our doctrine in order to fit it with what the culture says. And so I can see in the ancient days when the apostles and those who had the authority to actually teach the truth and actually present doctrine to the world, they died and that authority was lost, and then we shift to the apologists. Rather than the witnesses of God, rather than his apostles and his prophets, we get apologists. And they start trying to explain the doctrine according to popular philosophy. And within a very short time, I don't know exactly when it all came to its final conclusion, but within a few hundred years, we had lost the gospel completely. There was no priesthood authority, and the true doctrine was corrupted by the philosophies of man. And we're seeing the same process today with modern apologists trying to blend true gospel doctrine with the philosophies of man. And it is leading so many people away from the truth. And it is a practice that I will not share in, and I will not call myself an apologist, because I will only teach the truth of the doctrine. I don't care what is popular.